Alright guys, welcome to the next part of our section. In this part, as promised, we're going to start to look at the search results controller, which we have created and hooked up already to our search controller, but there's not a whole lot going on in here. So let's talk about what we want to do in here. So generally, the premise here is when I tap into this search field and I start searching for, let's say, Apple, I would get a list of suggested stocks, and when I select the stock, we would see the details about it. So that list of selected, or rather relevant stocks for my search is what this controller is responsible for. So you can probably infer we're going to use a table view or a collection view to show those results. And the watch list controller will basically provide the results controller those results. So let's go ahead and create this. Now, I know we haven't hooked up our API yet. That'll be the next section, or next video, I should say, where we will actually start seeing some live data. But let's go ahead and at least stub this out so we have something to work with. So search results controller, we're going to go ahead and first and foremost give it a background color. That is not how you spell background colors because I have a comma there. We'll go ahead and say the background color of this guy is going to be a system background. And we're going to want to override view did layout subviews, since we are going to want to lay out our table view, which we'll create now. So we'll go ahead and create a table view here. It's going to be of type UI table view. And we're going to create this with this anonymous closure pattern, which allows us to configure the table and return it. So here we want to register a cell. So what kind of cell do we want to register? Whenever we see a search result, it would be pretty useful if we saw maybe a primary label of the stock symbol. So in Apple's case, it would be AAPL. And then underneath it, it would be nice to see the name of the actual company. So it'd say Apple Inc. So there's actually a cell built in to UIKit already, which allows us to use the subtitle format. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our views folder. I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and I'm going to create a new file. It's going to be a Cocoa Touch class, and we're going to subclass a UI table view cell, and I'm going to go ahead and call this a search result table view cell. Go ahead and create it. Make sure the box for a nib file is not checked. We're going to delete all this jazz in here, and the first thing we're going to want to do is drop in a identifier. This is how we're going to register the cell to the table, and we actually only need to do two things in here. First up, we want to override the initializer, and in super.init, we're going to say the style here is going to be a subtitle, and the reuse identifier, just go ahead and pass that in. And then you want the other initializer here as well, which is required, otherwise it'll yell at you, which is this required init with coder. And now that we've got this created here, we can actually jump back to our search results view controller. And here we're going to go ahead and say table. I want to register the search results table view cell.self for that cell.identifier. So cool, so now that we have this, we want to create a function that's going to say set up our table. So you might have seen this pattern already, but it's generally good to create these modular functions that are isolated in what they do. So instead of putting all the table view config code in the view did load function, you want to put it in here to make it just a little cleaner and easier to reason about. So the first thing we want to do here is add our table view to the view hierarchy. We're going to want to say that the table view's delegate is self, and we're also going to want to say that its data source is self. So the data and interactions will be handled by this controller, and you see errors there because we have not conformed to those protocols yet, which we're doing right here. And the two minimum required functions that you need for table views are number of rows, I'm just going to say 0 for now, and cell for row at index path. And in here, we're going to go ahead and dequeue our cell. So we'll say table view. We're going to say dequeue a reusable cell with an identifier, which is the cell identifier that we had created. Let's make sure we spell that correctly. Identifier, that's not how we spell identifier. Let's see, search. This is the view controller, that's why it's giving me issues. So we're going to say search result table view cell dot identifier for the given index path, just like that. And once you've got this, we want to return the cell. Let's say return cell. And for now, I'm just going to show some dummy data so you guys can get an idea of what this is going to look like. So maybe we'll say here Apple, and the detail label, which is the subtitle label, is going to be Apple Inc., just like that. Number of rows, maybe we'll go ahead and say 10 so we can actually see something. And we definitely want to give our table a frame here to match the entirety of the bounds. So let's go ahead and give this a build and run. And what you'll notice is if I start to type in here, this is what our search results currently look like. So right now we tap on it, we're not handling it, and we might want to change up the way this looks, the actual look and feel of the cell. Now, I'm not going to go too far into that at the moment, but there are some things we want to handle here before we move on further. So because the search results controller is owned by the search controller, we want to interact with the table cell, but we want to basically use a delegate to proxy back our selection. So if that was confusing, that's okay. I probably think, it might be, but what we want to do here is we want to create a protocol, and I'm going to go ahead and say that there is a delegate here of type any object. And essentially, whenever we tap on a search results, we want to pass that back to our watch list controller so we can present details about it. So we're going to have a function in here, which is going to be the name of our controller. We'll say did select search result. And now because we don't have a object that represents a search result yet, I'm just going to make this a string. And on this controller, we're going to have a weak property of type delegates for this controller. And now what we can do is whenever the user selects, so if we override did select row at index path, we first want to unselect, unhighlight that row, but now we want to say delegate, and we want to call that function passing in the results. So in this case, I'm hard coding it, but once we have actual data hooked up, you'll see that we pass the relevant selection back. Now, once we've passed it back, we want to actually present the details about the selection. So how do we handle that? So if we come back to our watch list controller where we set up our result controller, which is right here in the setup search controller, we can now see in here the result VC has a delegate of self. Now this delegate is a property we just added, and of course, to make use of this, we definitely want to conform to that delegate. So at the bottom here, we're going to say extension watch list view controller, and we want to conform to that delegate, and it has that single function that we went ahead and added, which is, let's see, search results view controller did select, and here we would present stock details for given selection. So cool. So let's see what's going on here. Looks like this is yelling at me, but the error just went away. Sometimes Xcode just takes a second or two to catch up. But let's go ahead and give this a run once more. And let's talk about one last thing. So we have our search results controller as we start typing, of course, just dummy data for now. But how do we actually feed in the results? Because the search result API call will be made here in the watch list controller, and we even wrote a comment here to update results controller once we have actual results. So how do we do that? So we're going to go into the search results controller, and in here we're going to add a function which is going to be public, and it's going to be update with results, and it's going to be a collection of search results and search results types, but we don't have that yet, so I'm just going to use string here. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to tell the table view to reload, and I'm also going to hang on to the results. So I'll go ahead and here we'll say self.results is results, and up here we're going to create that array. We'll say private var results is an array of strings. Bear in mind, all of these string types that I'm using, we're going to change these to objects. It's just a placeholder at the moment. But now we can basically call this function from our other controller. So we have a reference to result VC, so we can actually go ahead and say update with results, and here we would pass it in. So maybe we would pass in like Google, right? Whatever the results are. And that's how, the interaction between the search controller and results is going to work. In the next video, we're going to jump into setting up our API and making our very first API call, which is going to actually let us search for actual stocks and symbols and companies. So that's all for this one. I'll see you guys in the next part.